Hello there. I'm super excited about our guest today. Eric Forney is somebody that I have a ton of respect for. Eric, I'm hoping that when you start talking today, you share a little bit about your background and how you got started into real estate. Today, Eric has a very large team. I'm sure the volume, and he's also in Gary's top 100. He's also an operating principal in Indianapolis, and he's a public speaker, and he's just an amazing man who's rocking it with the Mohawk today. So, Eric, welcome to Keller Williams Louisville East today.
Thanks, Linda. I appreciate that. Thanks, Krista and everybody. Yeah, so oddly enough, I just was looking a minute ago before I clicked on here. So we're actually just about to crest a milestone for us at 2 million in GCI. We're right now about 4,000 shy in the last 365 days of that milestone. So it's a really big occasion for us. A little bit of background on me, and I won't bore you with all of the details, but I've been in real estate now for 6 years. I've been at Keller Williams for 4. So when I joined here in 4 years ago, I was an individual agent, and I was in a bunch of pain. And by pain, I mean I had no life, and I had a lot of closings and a lot of chaos. And so I came to Keller Williams to figure out how to get out of that pain, and knowing that I didn't know how to hire, didn't know how to train, and really build a business. And so one of the things that I learned how to do, of course, by being at KW, was to build a team. And so my second year at KW, which would have been about 2.5 years ago, about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago now, started a team, and we hired only non-licensed, experienced real estate agents from really with no sales background. So first 3 agents were, one was a forklift truck driver, one was a pastor, and we've had typically built a business where we have not hired real estate agents. Our first year as a team, we actually became the #1 team in the Ohio region from a GCI standpoint, and like I said, just went a little over 2 million in GCI in the last 12 months. Right now, we're a little lighter than we were pre-quarantine. We have decided to do some bailing out of the boats, I guess, and that we have dehired 5 during the last 60 days. And so it's been a challenge, and it's been incredibly powerful for us from a momentum perspective. In fact, in the last 14 days, we've sold more homes than we ever have. And again, we're 5 shorter than we were 60 days ago. And so, we've been incredibly fortunate to have had the success that we've had thus far, and excited, of course, to keep growing. So one of the things I like to try to do is start, anytime I talk with anyone, I like to try to start a conversation around the idea of what's in it for you. Like, what's the best use of your time? So if you could give me, let's get 2 things. 2 things, if we're going to accomplish something beneficial in the next 3 minutes, what would be 1 or 2 things that you have that you'd like for me to talk about, or like to learn or address in the next half hour?
You can also type in the chat box too if you have some things you'd like to contribute.
Did everyone mindfully show up here?
Eric, I'm going to speak up while they're getting their thoughts together or typing in. But one of the things I'm hearing our agents say, or they're struggling with, is how to actually look at it differently. And it's not going to be the same. I know you've been in some conversations with Gary not too long ago about this. It's not going to be the same. So how can they start thinking about it differently? What can they start looking at differently? What are some of the things that they should be auditing right now?
Okay, good. Yeah, I love it. But so think differently. What does new look like? Yeah.
You can
Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say for a second there, you kind of froze up, just FYI.
Well, let me, I guess if I freeze up here, or if we're loud, I'm up by the front of the market center. So if there's any challenge hearing me, just let me know. What I'll do is, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Anybody have a second thing that they want to accomplish with our time? Nothing. Nope. Give me 1 second here. There we go. There is an echo. Is it hard to hear me?
A little bit. You get a little bit of an echo.
Okay. Let's see if I can fix it here. Jump on a different line here real quick.
Okay.
I think we'd have this thing figured out by now, right? But the fact that like we live on these things all day, every day.
I was
But
just thinking about that the other day, that 6 months ago, I wasn't even sure what a Zoom call was. And now it's a big part of your workday.
Yeah, it's nonstop. All right, let me try to fix it here real quick. Is that any better?
You may have to speak up.
All right. Let's see if I can fix it here. Just a second here. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Hey guys, he's worth waiting for.
Oh, I think I figured it out.
Okay, let's go with that. See how that
Better?
works. Just a little bit of an echo.
Anything, or is it still any good enough, or no?
Let's try that.
All right. If not, I'll run down to my office. I'm just in my headset. If not, so if it's a pain or not effective, just let me know. We'll switch it up.
I think we're good.
With that,
I think we're good.
okay. So what I want to talk about then is one of the differences I think when you look at our team versus a lot of others is we're messy, we're chaotic, and part of that is because the team mimics a lot of the leadership, and for me, chaos is actually what I enjoy far more than being orderly and being highly systematic. And so what I really gravitate towards more so than skill set and habits is teaching thinking concepts. And so I think that now is actually the best time for us to be thinking about the way we perceive life and the way that we think about everything that we once believed to be true, and this concept of normal. Okay. And so for me, it's all about teaching the concepts of multiplication and the ideas of first principle thinking. And so what I realized is that when I can teach everyone in my organization how I think, I can multiply the results that made me successful. And so we're really not doing that by way of like script practice every day, or by a lot of the things that we're taught in real estate to do from a best practices standpoint. Almost exclusively what we focus on is thinking. And so every day when we're now during this quarantine phase, we're having daily meetings. So every morning at 9 a.m., we're having a huddle as a team, and that could be anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. And it's almost always exclusively fixated on the way we think. And so I think that the way we think drives the way we act, and it's the way we act that drives our results. And so what I think we have to first understand is that now more than ever, it's a challenge to battle the mind. So first and foremost, every day, we have to understand that when our mindset is the single most paramount thing that we can do, whether it's in quarantine or out of quarantine, right? So post-COVID, pre-COVID, our single most beneficial thing we can do is win the battle of the mind. And so for me, the habits that I've built in winning the mind is the concept of what time I wake up. And so last night I went to bed at 1:30 and I woke up at 4:40. Every single day, 4:41, the alarm will start at 4:41. And the battle with me and my mind is the snooze button. Right. And so even on 3 hours of sleep last night, I know that that I first have to win that war, which is how I think about my day and how I've had to brainwash myself, so to speak, or the narrative I've had to create for myself in growing a company is that if I can't wake up without hitting the snooze button, I can't be the leader that my people deserve me to be. We accomplish the goals that we have for our company, and they can't accomplish their goals. They can't first start by winning the battle of the mind. And so for me, it's winning my morning by winning the battle of the mind. And it's waking up on time, and then it's journaling and gratitude. And the next 4 hours of the day are spent learning in some capacity. Okay. So I spend about 5.5 hours a day in audio books from a learning standpoint or from some sort of educational capacity. And so that starts first in the morning in order to multiply that line of thinking. And especially given where things are or where they have been, our first thoughts drive our results. And so winning the battle of the mind is first and foremost for how we have to think about the results that we choose. And then secondarily, I think we have to understand that everything you know is wrong. And this is a concept that I preach in our organization, is that everything that you know about life, everything that you know about your business, everything you perceive about my business or the market or the coronavirus is wrong. And so every day what you should do is make peace with the fact that everything you know is wrong, and your goal is primarily to be less wrong today than you were yesterday. So in order to obtain the results in life that you seek, you have to start off by first admitting that you're wrong, because humans are incapable of thinking without flaws. And it's when we make peace with the fact that everything we believe to be true is wrong in some capacity, then we work to become less wrong until we learn to become right. And so it is adopting that way of thinking, that framework of understanding that our goal is to challenge everything that we hold to be true in order to continue to become more effective and more efficient. And so in preparing for some of this, one of the ways that I've looked at is who can we model this after? Gary, of course, talks about always having a model and a system for our business, and always having a model and a system for the way we think and how in life we get to choose who our prophets are, right? And that's with a PH. And so when I look at the concepts of disruptive thinking or innovative thinking, I think about Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and in studying them, what I found is they have a different way of thinking, as we can all acknowledge, of course, in that the way they've approached life is a concept called first principles thinking. I don't know if anyone is familiar with concept of first principles thinking or not, but it's one of the things that we adopt as a company in order to challenge the status quo, in order to strive to be disruptive. And now more than ever, in my opinion, is the time to be disruptive, which is why we have the sweet mohawk right here. And that's because what I wanted to do is model disruption for the team in a time in which they were still looking for the safety and certainty of what they believed to have been true, right? And so by modeling the fact that I was perfectly okay with disrupting everything about my own identity was a way in which to demonstrate that for them. And so if you're familiar with Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos at all, does anyone know anything about their childhood by chance? Anything about Jobs and Bezos from the way they were raised and how it may have corresponded to their outcome or their result? No?
Yeah, Eric. I believe that Steve was adopted.
Yeah.
And he learned design from his adoptive father. And that's how he developed excellence in design, was from his adoptive father.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I've asked this question repeatedly, and nobody else has pointed that piece out. And And so it's really fascinating that you brought that up, because it actually parallels into the next slide here, and the concept of flawed thinking. And while you are right that Steve Jobs was adopted, Bezos was also abandoned by his father. And what's interesting is a lot of people, when looking at the two of them, will say that that's what they believe had a driving impact on their success as innovators and as CEOs. And interestingly, when posed the question to both Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, what they said is that actually has nothing at all to do with their success. And so Steve Jobs was actually quoted, somehow there's this notion that because I was adopted, I felt as though I had something to prove. And at no point in time did he ever feel like he was less than, or was he ever made to feel dependent. In fact, he was always made to feel special by his parents. And Jeff Bezos had very similar thoughts around the fact that they were abandoned or adopted, and that it didn't actually drive them to create a different result at all. And so what it plays on is this concept of how most of us think in narrative fallacies, or most of us reason by analogy. And so when we hear something that makes sense, we believe that it is true. And so most people, when they hear that both Bezos and Jobs were abandoned by their fathers, believe that it caused them to have this sort of to prove their own worth. And yet what they both say is it never once impacted how they view the world. In fact, they both have alignment in saying that they view innovation much differently than most. And in fact, much differently than how we've been taught. What they've actually said is that the customer doesn't know what they want. And so if you're thinking about being innovative, Bezos and Jobs both said the customers don't know what they want. And so you should never ask the customer what they want, oddly enough. And their framework is that the customer only knows what offerings you have right now. And therefore the context is what's available to them today, not what they need in the future. And so as an innovator, it's their job to understand the customer's needs in the future before the customer does. And what they know is that convenience and simplicity is the number one thing that drives innovation and consumer purchasing. And so Jeff Bezos talks about the idea that if anyone had done market research on the concept of Amazon Alexa or the Echo, there's not a person in the world that would have said, yes, I'd love to have this black Pringles can sitting on my kitchen countertop, listening to me and my family the entire time, playing music. And that sounds like it'd be a great invention, right? And yet what Bezos knew about the customer is that we wanted convenience. And so the reason why the Amazon Alexa and the Echo have sold is because of our need for convenience. And the convenience comes by the fact that now we can tell Alexa to turn on our lights or turn them off, or play a song, or what is the weather. And so all of the things that the market research would say would never work prove to play out effectively from an acquisition standpoint, because they provide convenience to the consumer. And so when you think about the context of what we believe, or what we've always been taught in real estate, are we thinking about consumer convenience? And are we thinking differently about consumer convenience today than we were 60 days ago? You know, admittedly, I've not had a single Zoom appointment prior to the coronavirus. And I don't know if I would go back out and do listing appointments if I had a choice. I'm not sure that I would do a lot of the things ineffectively and inefficiently the same way that we were, because now we've been forced to become more convenient. I've not attended a closing in 60 plus days, and yet we've had 59 of them. During the exact same time, 59 closings, 0 of them have been attended. Think about the number of hours that compound as a real estate agent over and over and over from an inefficiency and ineffectiveness standpoint that we could have done away with when we think about convenience. And so what in your business can you apply the concepts of Jobs and Bezos around the idea of the consumer always wants simplicity and convenience? How does that change the way you think? And we need to change the way we think about real estate, because what we know is that the longer we've been doing something, the more wrong we are. And I find this fascinating. There's a study that looks at physicians, and says, the incidence of malpractice is 11 times higher for physicians over the age of 55 than for physicians who have less than 10 years of experience under the age of 40. Think about that. 11 times the amount of malpractice for physicians who have potentially 15 more years of experience compared to their counterparts under the age of 40. And so I always ask the question of people is, what do you think causes this? Knowing that the number one most legally pursued instance of malpractice is the failure to diagnose. Anyone have any thoughts on why older physicians are more sued for malpractice than their younger counterparts, knowing that the number one cause of malpractice is a failure to diagnose? This, I think, has a lot of application in real estate as well, by the way.
Totally agree.
Nothing? Okay. Well, this is my take on it. Is a failure to diagnose is a failure to ask great questions. It is believing that one instance is like another instance. It is reasoning by analogy, and it is creating a narrative fallacy. And so the longer we've been doing something, the more likely we are to believe that this patient is like that patient. And so what physicians end up asking is patient A like patient B? Whereas the younger physician with less experience is asking the inverse question: why is patient A not like patient B? And there's that subtle nuance of seeking to prove yourself wrong that causes us to ask different questions. And it causes, of course, a difference in diagnosis. And so as a real estate agent, I hope the last 60 days, you've been asking yourself that question, which was, what was I doing before coronavirus that I no longer should be doing? Was I doing everything that was focused on consumer convenience and on living the biggest life and me accomplishing the results that I wanted? Or do I need to disrupt that line of thinking? What do you not know that you thought you knew prior to this shutdown? The same problem that we run into from a malpractice perspective. Okay, and so the way I look at this is, when we're faced with a challenge like what we've been faced with for the last 60 days, is to reason by the concept of first principles. And so Elon Musk is incredibly famous for this concept of first principles thinking. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with it or not, but Elon Musk tells a story that when he went to invent Tesla, the electric car company, that everyone told him that you couldn't make an affordable electric car. And the reason why you couldn't make an affordable electric car is because batteries were 600 kilowatts per hour. And the number of required kilowatts was significantly higher than any consumer would pay for an electric vehicle. And so what everyone was telling Elon Musk was that basically you couldn't make an affordable consumer vehicle. And therefore, most people had quit trying. Most innovators had quit trying to make electric cars. And what Musk asked himself was, well, what are the first principles of electric cars? What are the first principles of batteries? And yeah, everyone is telling me it's $600 per kilowatt, but what is a battery actually made up of? And so when Musk asked himself that question, what he found was a battery actually cost $80 per kilowatt hour. Batteries were selling everywhere for 600 kilowatts per hour. So the most cost-effective way that he could acquire a battery, it was $600 an hour, and yet the most cost-effective way that he could manufacture one was for $80 per kilowatt hour. And that's what revolutionized the ability to make affordable consumer electric vehicles, and obviously launched the Tesla Motor Company. And so starting from the concept of first principles thinking, by boiling everything down to its simplest parts instead of what we've been told to believe or what we've long held to be true, is what allows us to think differently about our business or about our industry. And so we want to approach every situation, especially right now. So in Indiana, I'm in a market center, and the market center is 310 agents or so, and there's like 5 of us here today. And it's been like this for the last 10, 15 days. And my goal is actually to keep agents at home or out of the market center as long as possible, because I want to try to get our people to think differently, and knowing that the longer they're staying in a different environment, the more likely they are to challenge the way things have been done in the past, and the less likely they are to cling to the security of what we used to know. And so if I can change their environment, I can change the questions they're willing to ask themselves. And so they first have to first have a desire to seek the truth, which is a perfect application of this is, do we always have to do listing appointments in person? Well, interestingly, majority of us would have said yes previously, right? And now what we know is that the answer is absolutely not. There have been a number of us who have taken listing appointments and buyer appointments without ever having met the consumer in person or without ever having been in that specific home. And so we have to have a desire to seek the truth. And most of us believe that we know the truth. And yet what Elon Musk would say is that most of us believe lies and assumptions. We believe that the customer wanted us to come to their home in order to tour the home, and that was a lie and or an assumption. And so we have to then start to work down, that is, what do we assume to be true versus then what do we know to be wholly true and can't be distilled or refined down to any further level. And then once we know what is actually true itself, which in this particular case, when you think about a listing appointment and you think about conducting one physically or virtually, I'd even argue that the customer doesn't even want you to do one virtually. I'd argue that the customer doesn't want you to do a listing appointment at all. And I know that to be true because the customer wants their home sold. And the mechanism and the way in which it's conducted becomes most oftentimes irrelevant. What they ask for is the way it's always been done, because that's all they know. All they know is the way that it has been done and what's been available to them. What they don't know is what could be available. And we're starting to see that disruption outside of our market, right? We're seeing iBuyers start to come into the market in Dallas and in Atlanta and in Phoenix and start to disrupt that. And guess what? There is no listing appointment.
That's right.
And so we know that what is actually true at the core of it from a first principles thinking is the customer wants to move. They don't care the mechanism in which they're able to accomplish that. And when you get clear about what you assume to be true and what is true and can differentiate those, you can start to reinvent and innovate your business. And now more than ever is the ideal time to innovate the way things have been done versus the way things are going to be done. And I love thinking differently because it becomes a habit. It becomes this sort of like drug. And what's interesting is in Gary's mastermind of, I guess it's probably been like 6 months ago or more, Gary said to the room, he said, you are my equal. You are my equal. I know that you don't believe that to be true, but you are. The problem with you is you just haven't fallen in love with big thinking yet. You haven't been addicted to the way that big thinking makes you feel and the results that you accomplish by thinking big enough. You just haven't created problems that are so big the only way you can dig yourself out is to think big enough to jump out of the hole that you've dug. And once you figure out how to think out of a big enough hole, you'll fall in love with the thinking and the results that come by being addicted to that line of thinking. And so what do you need to do away with, or what do you need to think differently about in your business that's not allowing you to have the results that you seek? And I guess if I were going to kind of coach on that, one of the things that I like to see is the concept of like an elevating question. You know, Tony Robbins talks about the idea that the quality of our life is determined by the quality of our questions. And that never really meant anything to me until I finally think that I came to the realization that that means that if we stop asking ourselves challenging questions that cause us to defend the way things have always been done or the way we've always done them, then what we get is a very default life, or a very default way of thinking, and a default result. And so what I'd like to know is, then, if you were going to ask yourself big questions, is whatever your goal is, the question I'd ask then would be, is what do you need to do in order to hit your goal by the end of July and take off the rest of the year?
Wow.
And that changes the way that you approach your actions, because if you didn't ask yourself that question, you believe that you couldn't accomplish it. You believe that you don't know what to do. And yet, if somebody wants to role play it with me, I guarantee you that we can put a plan together in like 5 minutes for you to accomplish that result, because it changes everything that you think is possible when you ask yourself more empowering questions. And so what do you need to let go of that is a story or as a lie or an assumption, in order to think differently about it? And that's what allows us as a business, as a team, to take non-licensed or non-experienced real estate agents and get them to 40 to 75 closings per year in their first 12 months. If thinking that way wasn't disruptive and powerful, then it wouldn't be possible with someone without experience. So,
Yeah.
We've got basically, I guess that makes me right on noon. So I want to wrap up a little short here. What questions do you have for me, or what can I share from what we've experienced and what successes we've found during the last 60 days?
Well, they're putting that together. I'm just going to say, I never really thought about it that way, that what do we have to let go of? What do we, if you start with that in mind before you start planning, it makes it so much easier than trying to fix that on the back end of it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Who has some questions for Eric? You can come off the mic if you like, onto the call if you like.
You ask about what does new normal look like, Linda? Right?
Yeah.
And
love to know, but
yeah,
get your crystal ball out and tell us.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because in my particular position as an OP, and what I'm looking at is what does that mean from a commercial spacing standpoint, right? I mean, what does that mean from a lease standpoint? What does it mean from buying buildings, and what's the right balance? And I don't know the answer, but what I do know is that most of the time we can find the answer by looking at other industries. Fortunately for us, real estate is a slow adoption industry. And so one of the things that I'm looking at right now is to see what are industries that have traditionally been physically based, that have been far more disrupted than we have, and how are they going to come out of this differently? And so one of the businesses that I study a lot, because I find it to be far more progressive than real estate, is religion. And so what are churches doing right now? What is the mega church that built the 10,000 parishioner mega church doing now that the majority of their services are available online and it's not socially distant anymore? How are they going to adapt? Because they're going to have a far harder time than I am. And what I know is they'll do a much better job at it than most real estate agents will. And so how do I study what they're doing and get there first before everyone else in the industry is? Because to me, religion is just like the most fascinating business on earth. You're talking about the majority of staff being non-paid. Yeah. And rallying around one mission to cause progressive results. And
you can kind of see a parallel with that. I know we're getting ready to hop off. You can kind of see a parallel with that with Keller Williams, where you have an ALC and you have committees and you have agents that are independent contractors, and we're all working together to help them with their business. They have a choice every single day that they get up, whether they're going to be part of this family or another family. And so it forces us to think differently about how we're doing things for our agents to be there for them. And I just kind of see the parallel there between the mega churches and a Keller Williams office.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I even think about from a market center perspective. You know, you've got this mega church, and then you have right now what we see is everyone's virtual for the most part, and yet what we know is the small groups are what keeps the community together. And so, how do we integrate small groups into our businesses, whether it's on the leadership side or on the agent side? And so when you think about that question, is, you know, we had 3,000 people at our last 3 client events. Okay,
Wow.
so 160 closings by way of sphere and referral in the last 12 months with
Wow.
3,000 people at a client event. It's going to be it's going to be really hard for us to duplicate that in the next 12 months from a client event perspective.
Yeah.
And so that may be one of the things that we need to do away with.
Yeah.
And so studying the mega churches allows me to understand how are they adapting to large populations in order to build community into smaller groups. How are they able to take their community and niche down with a small group in order to create a tight knit bond? And in my opinion, one of the ways that we do that is we find commonality.
Yeah. You know, that's a fascinating statement, and we're probably going to have to close on that, which leads me, I was talking to somebody yesterday about mega camp and family reunion and all those things coming up and what's going to be different about that. Thank goodness we have some amazing leaders willing to think big. Eric,
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how much we've enjoyed having you on this call, and look forward to the day when you can actually come to Louisville and be with us in person. So,
Yeah, well, who knows when that will be.
yeah, but we will be here when that time comes.
All right. I don't know if I will be. I might be just virtual. We'll see.